How's it going, everyone? Welcome to another video to enterprise UI development. So in today's video, we're gonna take a look now at from a more philosophical perspective into a practical one. What is this enterprise UI developments? And anytime we talk about enterprise, we mean big, huge. So because this course is taught by Steve Kinney, head frontend engineer at Temporal, and he previously worked at Twilio, among other companies. And based on his experience, he's gonna provide now tools and practice of how can we now make our code base maintainable, whether it's for SAR projects or for any other companies, for a long period of time with a wide range of collaborators in large teams. And I think this is crucial because as a senior engineer, as a senior front-end engineer, and therefore a tech lead, right? This kind of practice mechanisms allow us to now collaborate and to maintain the code for those giant companies, for those enterprise, finance, healthcare, perhaps military if you have the opportunity to work with them, and see how you can now collaborate them and integrate code by making it maintainable over a long period of time in long or in large teams. So the thing here, because this is oriented is to the UI development, we're gonna look at a comprehensible testing, which is a thing sometimes we lack of. Hey, what are the things that we're gonna test? How are we gonna do this, right? So far we're gonna look at the unit testing and component testing, something that I'm quite familiar with, browser testing, browser-based integration testing using Playwright, strategy to keep your code maintainable over a long run by using its now automation tools like GitHub Actions, something that we're gonna explain that later, and pattern proposition to build solid foundations. Or in other words, what are the enforcement or policy that we're going to do to make our code maintainable. So because company are looking for your analytical skills, how is your thinking process as well as your technical communication. Hey, everything that you know, did you memorize or do you know the trade-off? Based on your explanation, can I implement your approach? As well as some engineering best practice and soft skills. It's like, hey, are you empathetic? Do you have patience? And last but not least is language specific domains as well as computer science. So because this course is laid out in this particular way, introduction, basic unit testing, building a CI pipeline with GitHub Actions, component testing, accessibility testing and code coverage, mocking and spy, integration testing with Playwright and enforcing standards. In today's video, we're gonna focus is on the introduction, because at the end of the day, this particular course, this enterprise UI development, is for building or this codes or this is a course on how to build infrastructure needed to manage a large code base. A large code base supported by a team of contributors. And here we need to look at a couple concepts here. We need to flesh out a couple concepts here, like what is infrastructure and what is maintenance. So infrastructures, according to Etymology Online dictionary, right? It is a French word from 1887, which is the installation that form the basic operations. That form the basics operations for economic, for it is economy. For it is economy. See, this is originally in military sense, but the infra means below structure. From the mid-50th century, it says the sense that the sense might be building materials, which is a structure. Hey, the building material needed, or the actions or process of building or construction. That's quite interesting, because structure means this sense of building material and the action of that, right? And the actions or process of building or construction. It gives you a sense of this, according to the dictionary. So because of that, the TLDR of all of this, and according also to Wikipedia, okay, so the infrastructures is the basic installation, exactly with C, is the basic installation needed, it's the basic operation needed it's the basic installations needed for an operations or systems for its economy, households and firms to function. So this substract, or this basic material, this basic actions of process to build the foundation of the layout system, or the foundations of an operation of systems for its economy, household and firms to function. So the economy aspect here is, again, from the Latin, is household management. From 5013, which is from French work économie, or from the Spanish is economía, or from German is economy, right? So it means, so the meaning of economy is also the frugality, judicious use of resource. Is from 1660, and this is close to this is close to the birth of capitalism. Why this is important, you might wonder. All right, because the whole point of this is to understand now where all of this come from, so we can now enrich our vocabulary, and as a way to now provide this service to companies or even to ourselves. We need to know is these fundamentals as a way to understand why we do the thing that we do, okay? And how is the impact that we're gonna have? Because a lot of the time, a lot of millennials and other people actually talk about is the impact, but I'm not sure if they are aware of that. And to have an impact, you must cause something, right? So an impact, that's another interesting word, impact here. Okay, from the mechanism aspect. An impact is the collision of two bodies. This is interesting. In mechanic, it's the collision of two bodies that when they do that, they merge to something. So this impact or these collisions, these collisions that actually can change this collision that actually can change the properties of those bodies, it is something that is traumatic for both of them as a way to form something new. Again, a lot of people actually talk about impact, and yeah, most likely impact. And to do that, there is a force that you apply to this and a transformation that you pass through, because this impact not only affect these two bodies, at least for mechanics, these two impact not only affect two bodies or multiple bodies, but also it affect its property. So you need to adapt yourself, you need to change that. So the reason of mentioning this, all right, and how important it is to look at the roots of words, because here is we're going to now develop this enterprise UI development. We need to know what is the end goal of this, okay, as well as what are the things that we're gonna do here in this course as a way to provide that to other companies, which is building this infrastructure that from the etymology online dictionary, it means that infra is under, below, and the structure is associated to building materials or the actions of constructions, the actions of building. So infrastructure is the actions of building this foundation of an operation or a systems for its economy, household and firms to operate, to function. And economy is the household management, according to etymology online, from 1530, which is the Latin word economia, from French economie, in Spanish economía, in German is economy. But the TLDR of this is that frugality, which is the judicious use of resource. This terminology is from 1660, and it is close to the birth of capitalism. So as a way to understand all of this concept, okay, of the infrastructure, which is the basics installations needed for its operation, let me actually okay. So this is what economy means. And again, the reason of this is because a lot of people actually talk about all of these concepts and economy and that kind of thing, but barely they know what actually that means, okay, or how quickly they can describe that, and what is the source that they learn that thing. So again, the TLDR of the infrastructure, which is what we're going to see in this course about how to build that infrastructure needed for maintain large code bases across several collaborators in large teams. Okay, so it's this basics installations or basic constructions needed for these operations or system. Yeah, basic for this operation. God damn it! Wait a second, remember. All right. And so yeah, all right. So again, stop. No more interruptions. So that's what we're gonna do here in today's in this particular course about how can we now make our code maintain. How can we make our code maintainable? How can we make our code base maintainable over a long period of time with a wide range of how can we make our code maintainable over a long period of time for a wide range of collaborators in large teams, which is how can we build now an infrastructure to make our code maintainable needed when it comes to collaborate in large code bases with other or with a wide range of contributors for large teams. And this infrastructure concept is crucial to understand as a way to explain that in the most succinct way possible, because now this will lay out the foundation of what is the infrastructure and what is the goal of this, the purpose of doing this. So infrastructures in a military sense, according to Etymology Online, circa from 1530 or from mid-15th century, it means, or from the French word 1887, is the installation that formed the basis of an operation of a system, originally in a military sense. So what are the basics tents and so what are the basic installations, the tent, the campaign, the barracks needed for maintain this operation or for the system? If you apply now to the economy, or in what is now the main use case here according to Wikipedia, right? Infrastructure means the basic installations of so the basic installations needed for these operations or systems for its economy, whether it is household or first to functions. An economy is for its household management, for the frugality or the judicious use of resources. And this word or this meaning, the house management, comes from 1530 according to the Etymology Online dictionary. And now the frugality or the judicious use of resource definition comes from the 1660, exactly 1660, close to the birth of capitalism. The idea of this is to recognize that this is now how we're gonna build now the basic infrastructure or the basics installations needed to maintain the UI development code basics for its economy, for it is household management, for the judicious use of resource, all right? Company resource, enterprise resource, your own resource, okay? And this is critical, especially in these capitalist societies, because you like it or not, this is reward. So capitalist rewards when it is resources are used with the most efficient way. Coño, estoy aquí grabando y no puedo. Uf. All right. So because of that, so this is it, right? The frugality, the judicious use of resource. So the whole point of looking at this concept, which can be heavy, is like it can be quite boring, especially if you don't know how to apply that, right? Which is, I think, one of the reasons why, especially when you learn about mathematics and that kind of thing, is like it becomes something boring because you don't see the applications of that. And there is two narrative here. One of them is that the educational system teach you the enough for learning how to do basic stuff, but it's up to you to actually decide where this thing comes from, what is the meaning of all of this, right? There are actually three types of education that come from the family, from the educational systems, and from the reality, right? The first two actually confront, or is not aligned to the third one, and it is your job in how to do that, how to make sense, how to get it. Anyway, but the reason of looking at this definition of infrastructure is that, hey, how can we now apply these concepts or understand this concept in our life, right? Well, glad you asked, because the question is how you can now, or what are the basics installations for your operations, or that is needed to maintain your life right now, okay, at least in 2024. So you need a place to sleep, you need a bed, you need a mattress and sheets, you need a good temperature as well, you need to eat, so you need a kitchen, and in that kitchen you need you need to eat, you need a kitchen and stove, oven, fridge, wash dishes, silverware, right? You need to a place to store food, whether it's in your cabin, also a place to store clothes, in your wardrobe. You also need a place to store water to drink, to shower, to go to the bathroom. More recently, store electricity for powering things in your house. So not only internet, laptop, laundry, house appliance, mobile phone, and also Wi-Fi, access to Wi-Fi. For example, to recording, to learning, that kind of thing. So all of this, all right, this is just the basic operations I'm briefly talking about. The basic operations needed to sustain your life. So this particular approach, as a way to look at that and then act accordingly, okay? Perhaps a lot of you actually have all of the things, and you have all of these things by granted, so you don't have to think about that. But it's important to make this exercise as a way to open up a little bit your perspective, right? And also to recognize one of the most important assets that you can have as an individual, which is time. But in any case, so yeah, this is now a more practical approach of infrastructure. Okay, these basics installations needed for your operation or for your system. In this particular case, for the economy. All right. So, for the economy. So, what's maintenance? You may wonder. So, maintenance here, which is a great question that we're gonna do. Let's go take a look now. The maintenance. Now, but etymology. Wrongful interference in others' lawsuits by a lord or his followers. What? From Old French maintenance. From the Old French, maintenance, upkeep, shelter, protection. From maintenir, to keep, sustain, preserve, meaning actions of upholding or keeping in good order. From early 15th centuries, that of actions of providing a person with the necessity of life. Also, financial provision or support that which maintains or supports. But interesting. Maintenance. Maintain. To support, uphold, aid. Hold fast, keep in possessions, preserve from capture or loss. From Anglo-French, maintenir. Old French, 12th century. Keep, a wife. Keep, sustain. Preserve in. Practice continually. Which is what it's doing right now. They call this maintainer. Practice continuously. From Latin manutenere. Hold in the hand. Manutenere. Manutenere. Hold in the hand. All of these concepts started to make more physical. So you can experience that. Holding the hand from manutenere. There's also the word of manutención. Manutenere, holding the hand. From manu, ablative of manus, hands, manu. And tenere, to hold. Sense on hold in an existing state or condition, keeping it as existing or continuance. It's from early 14th century, meaning to carry on, keep up. It's from mid 14th century, that of to keep oneself support. It's from late 14th sense of defend in a speech, uphold by argument or assertion. So all of this has become from more physical things to more abstract things. To keep oneself support, to defend in a speech, practice habitually. That's interesting. It's from 14th century. Sense of furnish means for the subsistence or existence of is from. Furnish means for the subsisting or existing of. It's from c. 1400, related to maintain, maintaining, maintains. Maintenance. during the war, and then it decayed during the Second World War, and then it decayed. Alimony, 1650, nourishment, also allowance to a wife from a husband, state, or in certain case of separations. From Latin alimonia, food, support, nourishment, sustain, care, sustaining, sustentations, welfare, scholarship, democracy, anyway. But that's a very interesting word, right? What is maintenance? What is maintenance? It's interesting. Maintenance, wrongful interferes in other lawsuits by a lord or his follower. You gotta be kidding me, man. From the old French, maintenance, but this is maintenance, because the word tenants maintenance, you know, maintenance, mantenimiento. Okay, that's interesting. That's interesting, man. That's also mind-blowing here. Maintenance, wrongful interference in others, lawsuit by a lord or his follower. From Old French, maintenance, upkeep, shelter, protections, to keep, sustain, preserving. So let me take it this. Upkeep, shelter, protection. So what is maintenance? Okay, so upkeep, exactly. So upkeep, shelter, protection. Upkeep, shelter, protection. So from Old French, so from Old French, so from Old French, we're talking about is mid 14th century. Mid 14th century, from Old French, which is upkeep, shelter, and protection. Maintenance, and from mantener, from mantener, maintenir, maintenir, maintenir. Yep, maintenir. To keep, sustain, preserve. To keep, to keep, sustain, preserve in, preserve in. This is the etymology, right? This is the etymology. All right, we can say is that, well, to keep shelter and protection, you know, to protect, to keep, to sustain, to preserve this, which is something that we everyone we are doing, living our life. We are all doing that, right? We are all doing that. Okay, so now let's take a look at what Steve Keeney actually have to say about it, right? According to those definitions. Of course, you're not gonna see what you're gonna see right now is that I'm gonna take notes out of this course. All right.
That over the course of 6 months, a bunch of well-meaning changes saddled you with a bunch of debt that you need to pay down. About some of these situations. Right. So let's talk about what this course is. This is a course on how to build infrastructure, how to build the infrastructure needed to manage a large code base supported by a team of contributors. Right. That means ideally not just you, and usually to the point where any code base over a long enough period of time is going to get a few unique qualities to it. It is probably going to get big. It is probably going to have a series of choices that probably seemed reasonable and good at the time, and in the fullness of time turns out to maybe have its edge cases, right? And there's lots of reasons for that, and we'll talk about it. But let's kind of talk about some of these situations where if any of these statements resonate with you, then this course might be for you. So hypothetically, maybe you've inherited an older code base, right? Who doesn't love that? Maybe that code base has been through, let's call them changes in product direction. Right. What it was initially supposed to do, maybe it's a different thing now. Some of the most fun code bases that I've had the pleasure of working in are, usually the ones where, hey, let's build this proof of concept, demo app that we definitely shouldn't bring to production. Oh, what's that? The CEO wants to make it the next big thing, and it's got to be out in a week, and we're going to bring it to production, right? So you have some of those. You have ones where maybe you were going one direction, and then you did a pivot in the direction. Now it's a totally different tack that you're taking on it, and now you have that kind of original foundation that may no longer be serving you. Maybe you're looking to migrate from an older framework. I'm looking at you, Backbone. To whatever the new hotness or whatever the hype cycle is these days, and you want to be able to do that without having your pager go off from now until the end of eternity, right? Or maybe, and I've been lucky enough to get to do this one once or twice.
This particular one, maybe you're inheriting an older code base, which is exactly what happened here. Especially when I started to work with them. It's I'm going to inherit this large code base, this old code base that I need to migrate to that. That's the best. Oh my God, that's way interesting. That is that is almost a perfect storm. Here it's I'm going to inherit an older code base because right now I'm going to work for a company, and especially I'm gonna work as an intermediary for a company called Global Logic, and they actually interview with their client, not my client, it's different, with their client as a way to now provide them solutions to them, right? So maybe no, maybe no, I'm going to inherit that old code base because it's actually rooted in React 16, okay? And they need that someone to actually migrate that. And what happened? You will have to take care about that. So maybe you're looking to migrate from an older framework to whatever is hot in this day, which is exactly what we have to do. Doing this migrations. So setting the infrastructure to do that, to do this operation, it makes a lot of sense. Or maybe you're breaking ground on a brand new project and you want to get started on the right foot. Oh my God. Did you? Okay. Okay. The following are reasons to set up an infrastructure for enterprise UI development. The following are reasons to set up an infrastructure for enterprise UI development. Reasons in plural. The following are reasons to set up an infrastructure for enterprise UI development. That you might need at some point to apply. And oh my God, it is. Which is this, especially if you're gonna work for this large company. It's like, yeah, my friend, you're going to do this. I'm going to inherit an older code base, which means that I need to actually lay out the necessary infrastructure, the basic installations to make this code collaborations across large teams, make it smooth as possible, okay? Or if the product change, which is also something that it's gonna do that a lot. So maybe that product goes through change in product directions. It's like, hey, yeah, but we don't want to do that. We don't want to actually satisfy this particular user needs. We want to go through this. And the other is maybe you are looking to migrate from older frameworks to whatever is hot in today, which is something that I'm going to do that. That's exactly what will happen, man. Or maybe you're breaking ground on a brand new project and you want to get it started on the right foot, right? This is also part of this changing product directions. In changing product direction is to make a POC, and then that POC becomes the part of the production.
Maybe you're breaking new ground on a brand new project with no tech debt whatsoever, and you just want to start things off on the right foot. No matter
you want to start off on the right
what, there's like something in the general strategies of this course that will kind of appeal to that, right? The code base I work on now, it's not 2 years old yet. It's like 17, 18 months, maybe 19 months, right? And even as I was preparing for this, there are already things in a code base that's not particularly old and not like saddled with too much legacy, where there are already things that like some of the strategies we're talking about in this workshop already apply to the thing that I work on every day, right? And there's always reasons. There are the initial plans you had even 18 months ago are no longer some of the things you're doing now. I was, for some reason, decided to use a pre-1.0 framework, so that came with a fun, set of things to learn as well. And then there's just the little mistakes that don't seem like a big deal at the time, like, for instance, not failing the build on lint errors, and just getting warnings. And then there's just the little mistakes that don't seem like a big deal at the time, like, for instance, not failing the build on lint errors, and just getting warnings, or the same thing for like accessibility. Then when you go to actually turn them on, you realize that over the course of 6 months, a bunch of well-meaning changes saddled you with a bunch of debt that you need to pay down. Right? So even in a relatively new code base, but especially, let's say pleasure. Let's say I've had the pleasure of working on like some front-end code bases that are like a decade old, right? There are, a lot of those become really difficult to manage and difficult to maintain. And we're going to talk a little bit about what the word like maintenance means and how do you maintain something and like some of the parts around that. But first, like, I should probably introduce myself. My name is Steve. Important if you're going to make changes to wrap your mind around the kind of just nuances that come along with that. So what are we going to cover? It is, as you can imagine, having a relatively decent testing strategy is somewhat important if you're going to make changes to a thing that you cannot hold in your head. So we will kind of talk a little bit about some of the fundamentals of philosophy of like testing, and we're going to run the gamut from unit testing to your browser-based tests with Playwright to some component tests across different frameworks, all those kind of things, and get to the point where like, okay, like we now know that we can touch things without worrying about something else breaking off the other end. We will talk about like how and when to or to not to fake stuff, right? Like a lot of times in a perfect world we would write end-to-end tests for everything. I aspire to live in that world one day, right? A lot of times we have to square all the things that you've written a blog post about like the right way to think about testing, and then you have to square that with reality and the fact that most of those things are not possible at any kind of scale. Right, and so we'll kind of talk about like how to manage the kind of like Platonic ideal of what we're supposed to do with like the reality of the code that we live in every day. We'll talk a little bit like as we kind of go through some of the setting up this infrastructure, when we can talk a little bit about like, okay, but like what are some of the best practices, or at least let me rephrase that, best practices in my experience for kind of structuring and thinking about whether it's components, whether it's the larger architecture of your application, and like where can we kind of like learn from some of that. Some of those, like depending on whether or not you are maintaining a relatively old large code base or a brand new one, like that will have different amounts of like applicability. Depends on those things, but we will at least kind of talk about that because at one point like there will be an opportunity to kind of leverage those. And then, as we all know, the real worst person on your team is you 6 months ago, right? The tied for second place is everyone else on your team who does not put semicolons where you like to have semicolons put, right? And like, how do we actually, like, not so much about the semicolons, I don't want to have that discussion, but like, there are certain things like, oh, we actually need this abstraction and we don't want to just use, let's say, hypothetically fetch, or like, do we have a system to make sure that we don't accidentally ship a console log all the way to production or something along those lines? What are the ways to kind of like maintain and check these things? A running theme of our time together is going to be the fact that like, a large enough code base over a long enough period of time, you will not be able to hold all this stuff in your head. You will not be able to find everything through every code review, right? And so a big theme of our time together is that kind of last bullet point down there, which is how to build the processes that make it so that you don't have to, right? Because we tend to get mad at our coworker who nitpicks all of our PRs, right? And even I tend, I'm the one that does that. I eventually like feel bad and just give in. You know who doesn't give in? Automation. Right, and like people will argue with you, but like they'll usually just take the fact that the build fails and deal with it, right? Like eventually it might come to a point where if your tests are flaky, everything falls apart. But generally speaking, it is probably really good for the health of your team to have this stuff automated and dispassionate about all these things or whatever you agreed on, and trying to like, you know, use it to the point where like it's serving you and not necessarily like pedantic.
So, okay.
Welcome to this course, like a large.
So something that he mentioned here, okay. So something that you mentioned here. All right, something that you mentioned here. So what we're gonna cover in this course. So I think the core components here is that, well, things to cover in this course is, well, so unit testing, component testing. Again, it is very data specific. Browser base, browser integration testing with Playwright. Yeah, with Playwright. What? Exactly, with Playwright. You got to use that. How and when not to fake stuff, which is important. Okay, how and when not to fake stuff. Some of the structure or the infrastructure or these basic installations needed for your applications, for these basic installations or this basic setup needed for the operations or for the system, for its operation or for the systems to manage its resource in a frugal way, to be, which is something that I mentioned here, to be judicious of a resource. Okay, so that's what we are actually using is this. We're setting is this infrastructure for this economy, for the household management of resource here. And what are the resources in our fronting applications? The components. Okay, what are the resources in our fronting applications? The dev server, the testing, the build process, the component itself. The infrastructure and enforcing coding standards. By building CI/CD pipelines.
Of code base over a long enough period of time, you will not be able to hold all this stuff in your head. You will not be able to find everything through every code review, right? And so a big theme of our time together is that kind of last bullet point down there, which is how to build the processes that make it so that you don't have to, right? Because we tend to get mad at our coworker who nitpicks all of our PRs, right? And even I tend, I'm the one that does that. I eventually like feel bad and just give in. You know who doesn't give in? The kind of core questions that we're going to look at is how do we create maintainable code bases?
So what is enterprise UI development? This is, what is enterprise? What is enterprise UI development? Exactly.
I think a lot about when I started at my current job. One of the super duper senior distributed system engineers went like, front-end architect, what is that? Right? And it made me think a little bit about like, what does it mean for a front-end app to scale? Right? Because like, a database might have 1 million users, 100,000 users slamming at it, right? Your front-end application, generally speaking, they download the code into their one browser, and sure, could be Internet Explorer or Safari, depending on the year. But generally speaking, like the idea of like 1 million people using it is not necessarily going to have a larger effect than 1 or 2, depending on like, other than the breadth of the different situations that they're using it in. So the way that I kind of explained the like plight of maintaining a large front-end code base, as I was like, you know how on the back end y'all like to break everything into very small microservices that don't know anything about anything and are totally isolated and encapsulated? He's like, yeah. I'm like, my job is to hide that from our customers, right? They should never know that you did that, right? And so the way I think that a lot of times a large front-end code base tends to fall apart is not necessarily that it goes down like a database, right, or stops taking requests. It's usually that it slowly erodes and like kind of like in like physics, like everything tends towards entropy, which is like chaos, right? It slowly erodes to the fact that that one like which should have been a 1-point ticket or a 3-point ticket, right? A relatively easy thing to do. Everyone's like, I don't know, that might take 2 weeks, right? Because we don't know what'll break. And every time you like try to like push something in production, someone's pager goes off, right? Insofar that we build these like large like stateful applications, the way that they tend to like break down on us is that they become so complex and so complicated and so chaotic that they become almost impossible to maintain. And that's when people start whispering about the rewrite. And I've done the rewrite. The rewrite never goes well. Right, like it's just a new opportunity to make the same mistakes and start the process over again. We will end up back there as well, and that is kind of what we are seeking in our time together. In this course, is to basically figure out how, to the best of our ability, how do we kind of like manage that chaos and keep it under control. Like I said, like even as I was putting all this together, like. And over the course of the last 6 months, like even in my relatively not particularly old, and it's open source code base, so I can't really hide anything from you. I've noticed like, oh, like there are things where like we need to like focus on the testing over here, or we need to, after we get all the lint errors handled and all the accessibility is handled, then that needs to actually break the build. But you can't break it in the very beginning because then you would never ship again, right? And so how do you kind of manage these things? Because they exist in new code bases and they absolutely exist in big code bases. If they don't exist in your code base, either you are the greatest front-end engineer and you're probably alone, because like, or you work on the greatest team possible, or it is so new and so small that you just haven't gotten there yet, right? And so that's great. Also, you should hang around because like maybe we can talk about how to make sure that you don't end up there, right? Because like for all these things, right? Like each time that I've done this, you're always trying to push back the ocean with a broom, but these strategies over time.
You're always trying to push
these things, right? Like each time that I've done this, you're always trying to push back the ocean with a broom. But these strategies over time start to add up, and you do have a code base that you're relatively happy working in, right? So yeah. So as I kind of said, right, like it's probably hard to like define what it means to build a maintainable application as we spend the next like several hours together talking about how to build a maintainable application. Like the best way to talk about it is to talk about what it's not, right? Like if you feel like you can't ship anything without being worried that something else is going to pop off the other end and break, then your app is probably not maintainable. Like you literally can't maintain it. You want to be able to change stuff and confidently know you didn't break something, right? It's one thing, like step 1, you would love to change something and have nothing break. Step 2, or like second best, is you'd at least like to know before your customers find out, right? I joke that like you always have tests, right? It's either you have automated ones that run lightning fast, you're doing it yourself, or your customers are doing it for you. Somebody is testing this software one way or the other. Maybe you want to refactor without overwhelming fear. Like you know that you need to like sit down and take a step back and think about this when a new version of whatever framework or even some library that you're using comes out and someone's like, should we upgrade? And you're like, should we upgrade? Absolutely. Can we upgrade? No. and like, or the fear around them, like, let's wait until like Thanksgiving break or like the end of December to upgrade. That's when you start to know that like it is time to like think about some of these things.
A lot of those codes are not maintained.
Yeah, like updating dependencies and knowing that everything works without having to go testing your very small to-do list app. Of course, you can do that. Even then, like, it can become tricky. Testing any kind of like decently large application, like that becomes like an all hands on deck. Like the team is kicking it for like 2 weeks, which is not the best use of anyone's time. And the theme that we're going to come across, kind of deal with, today is basically how do we automate this? How do we basically have processes and infrastructure that is making sure that we can feel confident? And like, yes, today is basically how do we automate this? How do we basically have processes and infrastructure that is making sure that we can feel confident? And like, yes, we should always have the human element there, right? Code reviews are great. They don't always work at scale. Like there's always like whenever there's a bug, like there's the joke to like get blame who the last person touched it. It's like my thing is like, well, who read the code review? Like who approved it? And I am guilty of this, right? Like sometimes you're tired, you don't have the same attention to detail, probably like the person who wrote it. Sometimes you just feel bad because you've been really nitpicky over things, right? And you kind of like, you get to the point where it's like either the ships or it doesn't, right? And so code reviews obviously are a thing, but then like, can we build the infrastructure around it so that like we're talking about like more forward thinking and high level things rather than like you have an extra space after that like opening bracket, right? Like have something deal with that for you, right? That's not a good use of anyone's time. Cool. And so again, this theme of like automation. If I had to, and I did have to because I prepared for this, think about like what are all the components of like a well-architected, and that's a word that I don't love, but I stole from Amazon, in terms of their like cloud services. Like what are the pieces of a decent like front-end architecture that you need to have kind of in place to be able to consistently ship software? Testing, right? Like all sorts of different kinds of testing, like love, but I stole from Amazon. In terms of their like cloud services, like what are the pieces of a decent like front-end architecture that you need to have kind of in place to be able to consistently ship software? Testing, right?
What are the pieces that are what are the pieces that we need to consider to constantly ship software? Because that's how now you can actually. It is all about maintenance. And we're gonna get paid for that. And a lot of people that work in maintenance, they don't get paid well enough. And that's one of the jobs. That is what the job is about as a computer science or as an engineer. You're going about is to maintain this system. And you better know how to do that. Because millions of lives depends on that. That's one. And the other is that if you are lucky or if you want to perhaps be wealthy, you're going to build now a tool that you can sell to the market.
Like all sorts of different kinds of testing, like some of these are more possible than others, just to kind of make sure that everything works because like I said, either you do it or you automate it. I think one of the nice things in the modern era is like a lot of the tooling around this stuff is a lot better. Like I would argue that TypeScript, for instance, like takes out an entire like class of tests that I used to write that I still occasionally write because like we trust that our APIs stay the same, but like we don't really know that, right? Like just because your type doesn't have like undefined or null, that doesn't mean that the API didn't give you that. Some of the worst bugs I've ever seen was a well-meaning backend engineer accidentally shipping a breaking change to the API, right? But generally speaking, if you think about what TypeScript is, right, and we're not going to get all the way into the weeds on this, but there's a certain, spiritual aspect of it that is running through your entire code base, making sure that you pass any given function something that it expects, right? And yelling at you when you're unclear about that, right? That takes away the entire set of tests where it's like, you pass null into the function to see what happens, and then you pass all sorts of other bogus inputs, right? Like, that can still happen because it's JavaScript at the end of the day, but like there's an entire set of tests that like will help in that case, right? Linting, and like linting's tricky because there's like the stylistic ones, which I'm not super interested in. One of the things that I've had to learn to do over time is like let go of my stylistic preferences, and like it's okay if someone uses a function declaration and somebody else uses a function expression. It's going to be all right. That's not going to be the thing that stops you from shipping stuff. That said, there are things in your linting that like you might want to avoid like unnecessarily like confusing like for loops or something along those lines. A really great example that I think a lot about is, for instance, we have an abstraction for making API requests. And yeah, under the hood, it's just using fetch, sure. But it's also doing things like, well, if there is an error, right, go ahead and like bubble that up to like Sentry, which is what we use to track like errors in production. Right, and then maybe it's got some retry logic, and like generally speaking, it's also got like types for the different endpoints that can hit, so you don't like mistype a URL and find. So it's got a whole bunch of like features that will go ahead and like we have cursor-based pagination, so on and so forth. Right, you should use that instead of using fetch. Right, if you're working in the application that I work on. However, like there's not really a test that's going to catch that. Right, that becomes a static analysis. Like, hey, I noticed you use fetch here. Like, maybe you should, you can opt out of it if there's a really good reason. But like, let's automatically check. Like, maybe you're brand new. Maybe you're just like switching in from another code base, and you don't know everything because we should document everything except nobody reads it. And goes ahead and just like kind of informs and helps guide the maintainability of your code base, because that's one of those things where a well-meaning mistake where somebody didn't know is all of a sudden, hey, when you're like going to the postmortem and you don't have any logs because maybe the rejected promise didn't bubble up to your like error reporting tools. In formatting, like I think that like just set prettier up and let it do its thing and never have these conversations again is a world that I like to live in. The kind of formatting, like I think that like just set prettier up and let it do its thing and never have these conversations again is a world that I like to live in. The kind of one of the major themes, like testing is obviously be a huge part of our time together, all sorts of testing, all the different flavors of testing. That said, if you have to run npm test, you're missing the point, right? So there should be some process that will go ahead and check the lint. There's some process that goes ahead and runs the test for you on every like push to a PR or something along those lines. So we'll talk a little bit about how to set that up, and like we're gonna use GitHub Actions, which is like wildly powerful for a somewhat free-ish tool, free on an open source repo, relatively cheap on a private repo. You can do really cool things. The postmortem and like that, right? That becomes a static analysis. Like, hey, I noticed you use fetch here. Like, maybe you should, you can opt out of it if there's a really good reason. But like, let's automatically check. Like, maybe you're brand new. Maybe you're just like switching in from another code base, and you don't know everything because we should document everything except nobody reads it. And goes ahead and just like kind of informs and helps guide the maintainability of your code base, because that's one of those things where a well-meaning mistake where somebody didn't know is all of a sudden, hey, when you're like going to the postmortem and you don't have any logs because maybe the rejected promise didn't bubble up to your like error reporting tools. In formatting, like I think that like just set prettier up and let it do its thing and never have these conversations again is a world that I like to live in. The kind of one of the major themes, like testing is obviously be a huge part of our time together, all sorts of testing, all the different flavors of testing. That said, if you have to run npm test, you're missing the point. Right, so there should be some process that will go ahead and check the lint. There's some process that goes ahead and runs the test for you on every like push to a PR or something along those lines. So we'll talk a little bit about how to set that up, and like we're gonna use GitHub Actions, which is like wildly powerful for a somewhat free-ish tool, free on an open source repo, relatively cheap on a private repo. You can do really cool things like have it automatically open issues for you. We have it set that when we bump the version on the open source UI, it will automatically open up a PR on our SaaS offering with a new version of that, like, and run the tests there as well. There's like, a lot of this stuff will be bespoke to the unique needs that you have to solve for, but we'll kind of talk about like the wide range of possibilities. And my goal is we'll do the kind of obvious things that like everyone should do, but we'll also kind of explore some of the like interesting recipes and edge cases. And my goal is that like a week from now or like 2 weeks from now, you're walking down the street and you're like, oh, I could take this tedious manual process and put together a GitHub Action workflow. And if you use some other CI/CD tool, that too, whatever. like that'll all work, but like something to like think about what are all of the annoying things that you do, right? And when we get to the like processes, I'll round back to deployment infrastructure in a second. The processes, which is like, okay, like how do we design new features? Do we have a process for writing a design document? Who reviews those, right? Those things are also really key to the maintainability of your code base as well. On those like build processes and systems and stuff along those lines, like as it stands right now, we do this thing where it's like we're going to release every Monday. It's an hour meeting with the goal to cut it down to 15 minutes. Right, so every manual step, someone's taking a note of like, how can we automate this? Right, and that's going to be some of the stuff we look at today as well. And then we have that kind of structure. Does our view layer sit there and process a bunch of data and make a bunch of API requests? Well, that's going to be hard to test, right? And we'll kind of see that in some cases, right? Like, what is our deployment infrastructure? That's going to be unique to every company you work at. Well, at least, talk about it at a high level. We talk a lot about like technical debt. The other kind of thing that I want to like highlight is there's also this cognitive cost, right, to a complicated code base, right? If you know that all of your like, if you follow, whether it's a pattern like MVC, which is, whatever, some pattern where okay, all of the business logic is here, all of the like fetching and like massaging the data is over here, all of the view layers over here, we have that kind of like set up and you kind of know where to go looking for something, right? That makes you way more productive in a code base than like everything kind of jammed together. When we talk about testing, kind of one of the heuristics that I'm going to kind of use, which is if you have to mock and stub your own code, you've done something wrong, right? Like third-party things you don't control, sure. But if you are all of a sudden like, oh, I don't have access to like that hook from outside the component or like the Redux store or what have you, it doesn't really matter, and you find yourself like mocking things that you own, right? That's a good sign that you have not separated these concerns. And kind of as I thought about it more and more, there are kind of like the three levels, and this pyramid is like designed after like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is like first have the systems in place, right? If you don't have like the systems, then like you can wax poetic from your ivory tower about the best way to structure an application. It doesn't really matter, right? If you don't have like the systems.
You can wax poetic from your ivory tower, man.
Then like you can wax poetic from your ivory tower about the best way to structure an application. It doesn't really matter. Also, you can like talk about it over lunch, but unless you actually have a process for like getting the team on board and all of those kinds of things, then like it doesn't matter either because it's just like your thoughts. And so like those patterns, those kind of like belief systems and how do we structure an application are like sit on the foundation of like, do you have a system that keeps everyone honest about that? And do you have a process for kind of collaboration? Otherwise, those parts don't really matter. And so we will spend a lot of time focusing on the systems because one, that's the most subjective, right? Everyone's code base is going to be a little bit different. But we will, when possible, kind of talk about the processes and the patterns. With that, we will be, writing some code and tweaking some stuff, right? Like I went through my own code base and tried to find. At one point, I was just going to grab the entire open source code base. So I realized that like trying to grok that was a recipe of sadness. And I learned some things even trying to pull certain functions out about how I'm going to break a lot of my own rules. So I have a set of things to do for myself after putting this all together. But like trying to take some of those patterns into small, like grokkable pieces. So we will be kind of objectively. It's not going to be like hours upon hours of me waxing poetic from my ivory tower, but we'll kind of look at some of these, particularly the systems, with some small bite-sized little samples.
So we pass through all of this to understand what maintainable code is all about. And as a way to... okay. So we went through what maintainable code is about, okay? So we went... to what maintenance means, which is how do we keep the entropy of a system. All right, so we went to what maintenance means, which is how do we keep the entropy of a system. All right, how do we keep the entropy of a system as low as possible. And when it comes to maintenance a code base, we usually usually talk in terms of how often can we ship code. And I think this is quite interesting.
Like, it's just a, you are the, it's to talk about what it's not.
You know, well, you should be able to do stuff, right? How often can we ship code and not just add new stuff on that, but like change and confidently knowing exactly how often can we ship code? How confident? Yeah, how confident? How confident is? How confident? How confident is? How confident we are to change? Yeah, how confident we are to change Go without breaking stuff. Yeah, how often can we ship code? How confident are we? How confident we are to change Go without breaking stuff? How confident we are to change code without breaking stuff? Can we do a refactor? And not only that, can we do a refactor without fear? Can we update deps without fear? Saying all of this,
it is
saying all of this,
yeah. Like, oh, the same attention to 10 you or 4, depending on clouds are.
in all of this, there are now components. And all of this leads to know components of a well architect. Yeah, of a well architect UI application. Okay. Yeah, and all of this leads to knowing the components of a well UI applications. Which is testing, static analysis, build process, separation of concern, deployment infrastructure, and the design process. And in the design process is like, hey,
going to be hard to test. Some pattern we we'll kind of see that. And when we get to the processes, I'll round back to deployment infrastructure in a second. But the processes, which is okay, how do we design new features? Do we have a process for writing a design document?
How do we design new features?
Who reviews them? I'll round back to deployment infrastructure in a second. The processes, which is okay, how do we design new features? Do we have a process for writing?
Do we have a process for writing a design document? So how do we design new features? How do we design new feature? Do we have a process for documenting? Do we have a process for writing a design document? Do we have a process for writing a design document?
The design document. Who reviews those, right?
Exactly. So who review those?
Right? Those things are also really key to the maintainability of your code base as well. On those build processes and systems and stuff along those lines, as it stands right now, we do this thing where it's we're going to release every Monday. It's an hour meeting with the goal to cut it down to 15 minutes. Right, so every manual step, someone's taking a note of how can we automate this? Right, and that's going to be some of the stuff we look at today as well. And then we have that kind of structure. Does our view layer sit there and process a bunch of data and make a bunch of API requests? Well, that's going to be hard to test, right? And we'll kind of see that in some cases, right? What is our deployment infrastructure? That's going to be unique to every company you work at. Well, at least talk about it at a high level.
What is the deployment?
Right, and we'll kind of see that in some cases, right?
What is our deployment exactly? What is the deployment infrastructure?
What is our deployment infrastructure? That's going to be unique to every company you work at. Well, at least talk about it at a high level. We talk a lot about technical debt. The other kind of thing that I want to highlight is there's also this cognitive cost, right? To account.
So that'll be all for this video. Take care. Bye bye.